Magnum's got a hit on his hands. Tom Selleck, 1 year ago, I had the chance to meet this gentleman before he was a star, and I said unto him, you are going to be a star because
I didn't believe you.
Your show was slick. The kids, I said the kids are going to love it. The kids loved it.
Magnum.
It was Magnum.
Ladies and gentlemen, here he is, the always good-looking Tom Selleck. Tom!
You know how for years people liked to gossip about Tom Selleck and James Garner, saying there was some big rivalry between them? The whole idea was that maybe Garner, being the older established star, wasn't too happy about Selleck coming in as the younger guy on the rise. Well, now that Selleck's 80, he's finally sharing what really went on, and while it's nothing like the tabloids made it out to be, it is still pretty shocking.
One-of-a-kind gentleman and lovely man.
You're currently in your 14th season of Blue Bloods, and you have been very candid about hoping to continue the run of the show. How hopeful are you?
I'm going to stay optimistic because everybody on the show wants to do it.
Back in the late 1970s, Hollywood was all over the place. You had the glitter and glam of disco on one side and the gritty, realistic style of New Hollywood on the other. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Tom Selleck was still trying to figure out where he fit in. He was the tall guy you'd notice in the back of casting calls, the one with the athletic build who kept getting typecast as a jock or a strong but silent extra. He had done a few commercials, even popped up on The Dating Game. And yes, he actually lost, but most of what he landed after that were tiny roles in TV movies that nobody really remembers. His resume was growing, sure, but not in a way that screamed future star. At that point, it looked like he might just end up as one of those actors you recognize on screen, but can't quite put a name to.
I'll be right with you, boys. Get your resumes out.
Meanwhile, James Garner was on a completely different level. He'd already been famous for 2 decades, thanks to Maverick and the Rockford Files, and he had this rare kind of Hollywood royalty status, the kind where people treated him like a king not because he demanded it, but because everyone genuinely liked him. Garner could walk into the fanciest restaurant in Los Angeles or the smallest greasy spoon, and people would fall over themselves to give him the best seat in the house. Now, on the surface, it didn't seem like Selleck and Garner's paths would ever cross. One was hustling for scraps in auditions, and the other was sitting comfortably at the top of the TV world. But then came a random twist of fate. One of those little accidents that only Hollywood can cook up, and it involved a dusty baseball field. Someone, maybe an agent or a casting director, convinced Selleck to play in a celebrity charity softball game, even though he hadn't touched a glove since he was a kid. Garner, a lifelong sports nut, was out there too, coaching first base and looking just as relaxed as he did behind the wheel of his Pontiac Firebird on Rockford. Selleck was just hoping to blend in, but, of course, that didn't last long. When a ball slipped through his fingers, Garner couldn't resist throwing out a sarcastic one-liner about his rookie hands, loud enough for everyone to hear. A lot of guys might have taken offense, especially coming from a big star, but Selleck caught the joke and saw that little spark in Garner's eye. Instead of being rattled, he laughed it off, and that moment of good-natured ribbing turned into the start of a friendship, right there between first and second base. After the softball game wrapped up, everybody, actors, crew, studio folks, wandered over to this little barbecue joint nearby. It wasn't anything fancy, just the kind of California place with checkered tablecloths and neon beer signs buzzing in the window. Selleck, starving after running around the field, grabbed a spot at a long table and tore into a plate of ribs like he hadn't eaten all day. Across from him, Garner was his usual cool self. No food, just a tall glass of iced tea sweating on the table while he sat back and watched the room. He had this way of just observing, like he could read everybody's story without needing to say a word. Selleck kept sneaking glances, trying to work up the nerve to say something. Finally, he leaned forward, feeling like a rookie asking the veteran for pointers. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice lower than he meant it to be. "How do you stay sane in this business?" Garner didn't rush the answer. He took another slow sip of tea, set the glass down, and looked him straight in the eye. What came next wasn't some cliché about chasing dreams or ignoring the odds. It was just pure Garner, direct, no fluff. "Easy," he said. "2 rules. First, never believe your own press. Doesn't matter if they're calling you the next big thing or the worst thing to ever hit a screen. It's all garbage tomorrow. The minute you buy into the good stuff, you're done. The minute you let the bad stuff crush you, same thing. It's just noise. Second rule, go home for dinner when you can. This town will chew you up if you let it. Keep you out all night talking about deals that never happen. Your real life, the one that counts, is at home. So go there." For Selleck, it was like someone had just switched on a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. Simple advice, but it felt solid, something he could hang on to. Before they left, they scribbled their numbers on cocktail napkins, and that turned into a tradition. Every so often, once a month, sometimes more, they'd meet back at that same barbecue joint, slide into the same booth, and talk. No agents, no handlers, no circus, just Garner and Selleck, iced tea and ribs, trading stories and keeping each other grounded. Those booth conversations weren't just about swapping Hollywood gossip. Garner was basically giving Selleck a masterclass in acting every time they sat down. He'd share these little nuggets of wisdom that stuck for life. For example, he showed Selleck how powerful a reaction shot could be, how sometimes the moment when your character doesn't say anything is way more impactful than a dozen lines of dialogue. "Let the camera find it on your face," Garner would say. "Don't shove it down the audience's throat." He also drilled into him the importance of really listening on camera, not just waiting for your turn to talk, but actually hearing the other actor. That's what turned a scene from 2 people reciting lines into something that felt alive. And then there was Garner's knack for making dry exposition actually land. He'd explain how the right pause, the right inflection, could turn a clunky info dump into a punchline, something he'd perfected during his Rockford Files days. But honestly, most of what stuck with Selleck went beyond the craft. These talks were about how to survive Hollywood without losing yourself. Around that time, Selleck had the Magnum PI script on his desk, and he was caught in the middle of this tug of war. On one hand, he loved the potential of the character, a Vietnam vet with a complicated past, and as a veteran himself, he felt this real responsibility to do it justice. On the other hand, the network suits were nervous. They wanted more of the flashy stuff, bikinis, sunsets, lighthearted island fun, and less of the heavy themes. Basically, they wanted to sand down the edges and make Magnum more of a cartoon.
Books. Based on his positive earlier experience playing the recurring role of Lance White on the Rockford Files, Selleck recommended a more reserved, James Garner-like, humorously flawed blue-collar type. He further implied this persona might help draw in a male audience as well. Tom proved to be right, but when the
Selleck laid all of this out to Garner, expecting a long strategic roadmap. But Garner kept it simple, just as he always did. He told him to trust his gut. If the character he wanted to play was still in the script, then it was worth taking. But only if they allowed him to keep every part of that character, the charm and the trauma, the light and the dark, because that was what made a role worth watching. If not, he advised walking away, knowing another opportunity would come. That kind of straight-shooting advice gave Selleck the confidence to push back. He argued for Magnum to remain layered, to stay a veteran, not just as a throwaway detail, but as a defining part of his identity. In the end, that choice shaped the show into a hit, because Magnum wasn't just another sunny action hero. He had real depth. Garner also hammered home something even bigger: how to treat people on set. He had this rule that the crew wasn't just background noise, they were family. On the Rockford Files, he was known for learning the names of every single grip, electrician, and camera operator, and he'd use them from day one. He even threw barbecues for the crew, making sure everyone felt like part of the machine. Selleck soaked that lesson in and carried it with him. On Magnum, and even now on Blue Bloods, he does the same thing. He knows the craft services guy's daughter is in college and keeps up with her progress. The key grip who's been with the show for a decade? He gets a personal birthday text from Selleck every year. It all goes back to Garner's philosophy. A show isn't a pyramid with you at the top. It's a team.
I hadn't really thought about writing a book, and when I did, I just didn't know quite what I was going to write it about. So, but I wanted to do it about the work and the fact that I had an accidental career.
For a time, their professional mentorship blended naturally into a personal friendship when they ended up as neighbors in a quiet, unassuming valley north of the city. It wasn't Beverly Hills or Malibu. This was the kind of place where people had real yards, where fences kept pets in rather than people out, and where Hollywood life felt a million miles away. On Saturday mornings, they often found themselves doing the most ordinary, un-Hollywood things. Selleck, who loved tending his avocado farm, would sometimes look up to see Garner leaning over the fence, eyeing his tomato plants with mock disapproval. A friendly rivalry grew out of these moments, Garner teasing that Selleck's tomatoes looked weak, and Selleck firing back with jokes about Garner's famously tough screen persona. The good-natured banter was balanced with gestures of kindness, Lois Garner sending Selleck home with a warm peach cobbler, and Jilly Mack returning the favor with bundles of fresh basil from their garden. It was normal, grounding, and exactly what both men needed after long weeks immersed in the artificial world of film sets. Their friendship was also fueled by a mischievous sense of humor. One of Selleck's favorite stories to retell was the time Garner managed to sneak onto the Magnum PI set in Hawaii. With nothing more than a grin and a $20 bribe to a security guard, he slipped into Selleck's trailer and replaced every family photo on the vanity mirror with glossy 8x10 shots of himself, smiling like a bandit, posing like a hero, hamming it up in every way possible. When Selleck returned after a long scene, he was greeted not by his family, but by a shrine to James Garner. He stood frozen for 20 minutes, baffled, before breaking into booming laughter that carried across the set. That prank sparked a legendary crew-wide prank war, a game of one-upmanship that stretched on for years and kept spirits high through grueling shoots. For both men, it was a reminder to never take the work or themselves too seriously. Then came the elephant in the room, the gossip. In the early 1980s, when tabloids thrived on wild speculation and half-baked stories, the idea of two famous men simply being close friends seemed to be too much for editors to accept. Around 1983, a paparazzo snapped a blurry, long-lens shot of Selleck and Garner laughing together on a hotel balcony during a promotional tour. The picture itself was harmless, but once a tabloid splashed it across the front page with a lurid headline about a secret Hollywood bromance, the rumors took off. From there, the stories snowballed. One week, they were supposedly hiding love children in a secret compound. The next week, their neighborly fence chats were painted as clandestine meetings. It was absurd, laughable even, but also insulting. Both men were happily married, devoted to their families, and fiercely private. To have their lives twisted into tabloid fodder was offensive, and for Selleck, still young and hot-tempered, it was tempting to lash out, maybe even sue. But Garner's advice cut through the noise. He told Selleck to handle it with grace and humor, not rage. The only way to kill a story like that, he said, was to starve it of oxygen. Anger would only feed the headlines. Selleck took the lesson to heart. Their cleverest move came on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. Walking out together, they didn't wait for Carson to bring it up. Garner leaned toward Selleck with a perfectly dry expression and teased him about how marvelous he looked, saying the color brought out his eyes. Selleck, quick as ever, shot back by calling Garner an old silver fox and returning the compliment. The audience erupted. They kept the bit going with jokes about secret dates at a local barbecue joint, and in doing so, they drained the gossip of any power. There were no dramatic denials, no public feuds, no tell-all interviews, just two confident friends laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. By refusing to play the tabloid's game, they won, not through outrage, but by being sharper and funnier than the people trying to bring them down. As the years passed, James Garner's strength began to fade, though he faced the decline in the same way he faced everything else, quietly, with dignity, and with an absolute dislike of anyone making a fuss over him. Even his closest friends received few updates. He stepped away from the public eye, not out of shame, but because he refused to let frailty become the final image people carried of him. He wanted to be remembered as Jim Rockford, not as a man confined to a hospital bed. Tom Selleck, understanding and respecting that fierce need for privacy, was one of the rare few who remained welcome in Garner's home. Sometimes, he would slip past the handful of reporters lingering by the gate, an echo of the gossip machine that had once dogged them both, and make his way inside. On the back porch, the same porch that decades earlier had been the backdrop of a blurry photo that launched 1,000 rumors, the two old friends would sit together. They never dwelled on illness or doctors. Instead, they told stories about the softball game, about the prank with the 8x10 photos, about that miserable fishing trip where neither of them managed to catch a thing. They spoke about their kids, their grandchildren, and the industry they had both watched change so much over the years.
Hollywood has lost a true legend. James Garner, star of TV and the big screen, has died, but he leaves behind decades of work for the world to keep enjoying.
On a warm July evening in the year 2014, James Garner passed away. At the private service, Selleck was asked to deliver the eulogy. He spoke of his friend's integrity, his humor, and his unshakable sense of self. His voice, usually steady and commanding, faltered only once. At the very end, when he recalled Garner's favorite piece of advice, words that applied to both acting and life itself, always leave them wanting more. And in his passing, just as in his life, James Garner did exactly that. Today, Tom Selleck slips James Garner stories into interviews the way some people drop favorite movie quotes. He's careful never to sound preachy or overly sentimental, but it's clear the lessons he learned in that back booth still shape him. When a young journalist asks for the secret to surviving and thriving in a notoriously fickle industry, Selleck doesn't offer a generic answer. He pauses, a faint smile playing on his lips, and says something like, "A great actor I knew once told me to never believe your own press and always go home for dinner. It's the best advice I ever got." He doesn't always name Garner, but those who know the story understand. The kindness that pervades the Blue Blood set, the insistence on family first, the quiet disregard for Hollywood trends, all of it traces back to Garner's influence. And when a reporter tries to bait him, fishing for a long-buried rivalry or the real story, Selleck just offers that easy, familiar grin. He doesn't get defensive or angry. Instead, he says with a sincerity that can't be questioned, "He was the big brother I didn't know I needed. He was my mentor. He was my friend. And I miss him every day." In speaking like this, Selleck does more than answer a question. He carries the torch for Garner, ensuring that the man who shaped him is remembered not for tabloid gossip, but for his true character. If this story made you smile, hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite James Garner or Tom Selleck moment, and subscribe so we can keep the good vibes coming your way.